CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara community through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2020 and 2021 to keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400, and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. And it is the first edition of the podcast post Stefon Diggs in Buffalo. The trade happening yesterday. The Bills send Stefon Diggs, and I think this is significant. A lot of people just forget the other two parts. The Bills send Stefon Diggs and a 2024 sixth-round pick and a 2025 fifth-round pick, minor assets in the grand scheme of things, but they had to sweeten the pot to get a 2025 second-round pick from the Houston Texans. Of course, the big part of the trade for the Bills is they are done with Stefon Diggs' contract. The Texans take it on, and then, according to Adam Schefter just an hour or so ago, the Texans are wiping out the final 3 years of Diggs' contract. They're going to move some money towards this year. So essentially, he is playing on a one-year deal. He will be a free agent after the upcoming season, in which he will make $22.5 million. I'm not so sure that that deal would have helped the Bills out much. It still would have been a massive hit to the salary cap, even if Diggs had given the Bills the same courtesy on the contract, or courtesy is a loaded word, if they'd made the same arrangement. So I don't really think that helps the Bills. And the Bills are concerned that Stefon Diggs simply is not a number one receiver anymore, and it's time to move on, that they could find somebody with who can fill that vacuum, at least for a season, before they are free and clear and have all that cap space back in 2025. But what I think Schefter's report obviously indicates is that Stefon Diggs was aware of this trade, and his agent, Adisa Bakari, almost certainly working on it prior to the trade. So it was all done with blessings. Does it prove that Stefon Diggs asked for a trade? Not necessarily. The Bills could have gone to him and just said, we're going to allow you permission to seek a trade. If something happens, fine. If not, we'll stick with you. There's all kinds of things that we don't know there. Although I do think that Brandon Beane not answering the question was somewhat telling yesterday, because if Stefon Diggs did not ask for a trade, I think it's pretty easy for Brandon Beane in that moment to say no. He did not, of course. So we have to speculate a little bit there, maybe some educated speculation on my part. But it certainly seems that Stefon Diggs was happy to leave. And so Jonah, I mean, that's the big setup. So that way we have all the information up front for our listeners, the latest on the Stefon Diggs situation. Jonah, your takeaway on the trade, and whether it was a smart move by the Bills. Did it have to happen? The floor is yours.
Well, I think back to something Stefon Diggs said early on in his time with Buffalo, and more in relation to the end of his time in Minnesota and the trade that landed him with the Bills, where, and the circumstances were different, but in many ways thematically the same. The Stefon Diggs experience in Buffalo ended the similar way as it did in Minnesota. And Stefon Diggs at the time said, there's truth in every rumor. And there's been a lot of rumors, a lot of reports, a lot of speculation about Stefon Diggs and his relationship with the Bills, with Josh Allen, with Sean McDermott, with the offensive coordinators, with his, and some of it haven't been rumors. Some of it have been things his own brother has tweeted, or things that have been reported through reporters in different ways, and some things that were maybe even obvious by reading body language or reading between the lines of things Stefon Diggs actually said. But a lot of what we were hearing and wondering about and believing or not believing to be true a year ago about Stefon Diggs and his desire to not be with the Buffalo Bills, and maybe the Bills running out of patience with Stefon Diggs and his personality came to fruition a year later. And I think a lot of there's nothing to see here, and why do we keep asking Stefon Diggs if he wants to be on the Bills, and why does this keep popping up as a story all throughout the season, show that that was something that was probably bubbling underneath the surface longer than we knew about, and maybe even more so than we knew about, that there were fissures in that relationship, and it probably was difficult for all of the parties to get through last season. And I think that all of the parties maybe realized that they couldn't go into another season on the same circumstances, especially as you laid out, with maybe Stefon Diggs not being quite as productive of a player as he was a year ago at this time. And they didn't even really want to go into another offseason. I was struck as much by the timing as everything, because there are some salary cap reasons and different reasons why maybe it would have been better for the Bills to make this trade after June 1st or later on in the offseason into the preseason. And they decided to make this trade before OTAs and the offseason workouts begin in 2 weeks. And it seemed to me like this was made deliberately to make sure he's not part of the offseason program and not part of the team going forward when they reconvene in a couple weeks in Orchard Park.
Well, he did not attend the voluntary workout portions of the Bills program, so he wouldn't even be there. But people would be asking about it, as they do every year, and Sean McDermott would be asked about it. It's every player's right. Excuse me. It's every player's right to not attend. And I think once you get to a certain stage in your career, I'm actually a proponent of not attending, because I generally side on with labor when it comes to work conditions, what is expected of you, what is demanded of you, the things that aren't in your contract that teams expect you to do. So when you get to a certain point, you've proven yourself, you're on the team, the offense, there's stability at the head coach position and the coordinators and all that stuff. Are voluntary workouts imperative? No, they're not. And if guys have things that they want to do in the off season, whether it's jetting around for Fashion Week or playing golf, you should be able to do it if you want to. And I don't think it reflects necessarily on leadership. But Sean McDermott would certainly be asked about it again, just as he was asked about it at the combine, just as he was asked about it at the NFL owners meetings. Same thing with Brandon Beane. Josh Allen would now be getting asked about it. What's your relationship like? Maybe they just got tired of lying. They got tired of saying all the things that you need to say to keep the peace. And I'm not faulting them. I'm not, Stefon Diggs, when he would be asked repeatedly, and it would get incessant sometimes about, are you happy here? Do you want to stay here? And he would turn the tables and make the person asking the question look foolish. But you say, Jonah, as you pointed out, there was something there. There was a there. But of course he's not going to say it, or he wouldn't. He would be smart not to anyway. But that all leads me to a point that I guess I wish I would have made in my column yesterday. And I hadn't thought of it until you phrased it this way. No, I feel bad for, and my son has a signed Stefon Diggs Bills mini helmet in his bedroom. I got him for Christmas a few years ago. There might even be a jersey somewhere here in this house. I've said on this podcast a number of times, I think of his greatness. One of my favorite players to watch all time. I'm not even going to put in the caveat of covering the Bills or recently. I put him up there with fun players that I've ever seen play football. In the same sentence for me personally as Walter Payton. Stefon Diggs at his best was mesmerizing to watch for me. But I think that as time went on and people dug in with their takes on who Stefon Diggs is and what he wants, and he clearly wants to be here, everybody would always say, why are we arguing about this? He loves it here. All you have to do is see him on the sidelines, cheering for his guys, giving them pep talks, playing catch with fans before the games, keeping in mind that, the cameras are on him at all times. He knows the cameras are on him when he's doing this. Just something to keep in mind. But I'll wrap it up. I know I'm rambling here a little bit. My point is, Jonah, I bet today and yesterday there are an awful lot of people who feel like suckers because they defended Stefon Diggs and his loyalty and his leadership. And the thing, he crosses a line when he starts to maybe take a swipe at the quarterback that people are always going to choose over Stefon Diggs. We now see that he probably wanted out, even though he was saying all these things, and the passive aggressiveness and the cryptic tweets and the brother who's constantly chirping the Bills and Buffalo and Josh Allen, in which Stefon Diggs never pushed back. And in fact, if you asked him about it, he got offended that you would even bother. I think it puts the Matty Glab situation in a different context of the past 48 hours compared to what people may have thought 72 hours ago. There are so many people who defended him or viewed all of the things that made them smile. And now it's totally changed. I think that there are a lot of people dealing with, you know what, maybe Stefon Diggs wasn't that guy I thought he was. He didn't want to be here anymore. And for whatever reason, whether it be Josh or whether it be the team, maybe he felt, just change of scenery. I'm getting tired of only reaching the second round of the playoffs. And that falls on Terry Pagula and Brandon Beane. And there's all kinds of people you can point your finger to at that. But anyway, I think there are probably a lot of people today who feel like suckers for defending Stefon Diggs to the end, for his love of Buffalo, and all he wants to do is bring a championship to Buffalo, and he just wants it so bad. He's just so competitive. That's why he comes off this way. That's why he storms out of the locker room before Sean McDermott gives his pregame speech. He just wants it so bad. That's why he is in Sean McDermott's ear against the Cleveland Browns a couple of years ago, because he's not getting the ball enough. That's why he is wildly flailing his arms at Joe Brady and Josh Allen on the sideline of the Cincinnati Bengals playoff game. And they obviously seem totally exhausted by him in that moment. Yeah. Maybe it's not just because he just wants to win. Maybe, and the Bills were tired of it. And that was my column yesterday, all the things. But anyways, again, to reiterate, you brought up that idea that I bet you there are probably a lot of people today that are like, yeah, that's that's not the guy I thought I was cheering for, or the guy that I thought I was, picking fights with, or picking fights for, or taking up against, caping on social media for.
Yeah, and we saw that dynamic play out just in his relationship with Josh Allen. When he first got here, it was believed and even said that, Stefon Diggs wanted to play for the Bills because he wanted to play with a quarterback like Josh Allen. And in a passing attack that he wasn't able to do in Minnesota. And then there was the Allen Diggs campaign lawn signs and the Sports Illustrated for Kids cover, and this idea that they were just best friends out on the football field, and a tandem of superstars at quarterback and receiver. And that relationship changed over time, and even the public displays of affection between the two, where they seem to be just coworkers instead of best friends out on the field over the past year. And not that any of them are really responsible for perpetuating a myth, but it did seem to be a myth a bit of how much they loved playing with each other and loved being each other's teammates. And the idea that Stefon Diggs really wanted to win in Buffalo, and that was his number one concern, and everything that he was ever upset about was because they weren't winning in Buffalo, that was probably a little bit of a mythical creation as well. Now, does he maybe have a better opportunity to win in Houston? That's to be debated, but I don't think that's clear. I don't think he's as far as standings, he's going from a better team to a worse team. Houston might be a team on the rise, but this isn't like he's leaving a bad team to join a Super Bowl contender. He's leaving a Super Bowl contender to join a rising team that isn't at that level yet, and could still win more games with his new team than he did with his last team, but doesn't seem to be going into a higher win probability situation. So, yeah, and as you've laid out, there's reasons why some of us in the media, some people in the organization might have tired of dealing with Stefon Diggs and might not want him and all the distractions that potentially could be created around anymore. but he's going to be missed in that sense from a entertainment and a content wise, and even from the national perspective of talking about the Bills. There's just going to be a lot less there without Stefon Diggs. Even if the Bills are able to find new receivers that replace the production and the offense as a whole is just as good, it's going to be hard to, I think, replace his star power and personality. And maybe it's better for some people that have to deal with that in the building on a day-to-day basis, but from the media, entertainment, storytelling aspect of the Bills, there's a loss to him not being part of the franchise anymore.
Yeah, you think of conversations that we would have with Mike Rodak back when he was covering the Bills for ESPN. And of course, he was covering them during the drought, and his frustration of pitching stories to editors who kept giving him the Heisman stiff arm, pretty much about like, no, we're not interested in that. No, we're not interested in that. Stefon Diggs is always interesting. Any content, any story about Stefon Diggs, an editor wants it. And because he moves the needle. And a lot of it has to do with fantasy. You know, he's a wide receiver one, a superstar. There's all kinds of things like that. But then you take the off-field stuff and things that carried over from Minnesota. A lot of the Stefon Diggs narrative from Minnesota evaporated. You know, we saw it quite a bit over 4 years about people saying, man, how Minnesota had it wrong. And for 3.5 years, they did, apparently, because he seemed happy and, well, mostly happy. Um, it, um, but like you say, it is now a similar ending to what happened in Minnesota. And it reinforces now again, you know, maybe we were wrong about him. We saw a version that we wanted to see. We saw the guy who was getting the Bills from laughing stock to Super Bowl contender. The guy standing with his hips, looking at with his hands akimbo, watching the red and yellow confetti fall in Arrowhead Stadium, and everybody looked at it and said, "That is my Stefon Diggs. That's our captain. That's my wide receiver one. Thank God we have Stefon Diggs." But again, we have a totally different feeling now. I'm sometimes hesitant to mention things that I saw, but I didn't put in a story, because then it seems like, well, why didn't you include it in your story? And I just went back while you were talking there, Jonah, and looked at my story from the week 1 loss to the New York Jets in the Meadowlands. That's the game that Aaron Rodgers' Achilles injury happened. Josh Allen threw bad interceptions, and all the excitement about the season starting. Everybody was wondering, who the hell is this Josh Allen? The guy who clearly has a lane to run, but is choosing to force a ball into triple coverage. And how forlorn Josh Allen was after that game. And I include it late in my story because I was getting around to how it impacted him, this loss, how hard he was taking it. And in the locker room after the game, when the media is allowed to be in there, everything's pretty much fair game unless it's a medical conversation or something happening in the trainer's room. But anything happening at a locker stall is within our rights to report. And Josh Allen was sitting there in full uniform with Kyle Allen trying to console him, and a stream of players coming up, patting him on the back, dapping him up, saying, "Hey, you know, we'll get him next time, man." And I quoted Deion Dawkins in the story, and he said, 17 for life. I mean that. You know, they were trying to pick the guy up. He had a towel draped over his head, and he just sat there. One thing I didn't include in the story was Stefon Diggs coming up to him after the game. And I didn't include it, I think, because as I recall, I didn't include it because I didn't know what Stefon Diggs said to him. But Josh Allen snapped at him. And he said, "It's one fucking game." And kind of motioned like, "I'm not talking to you here." And Diggs walked away, and Josh sat there. And in retrospect, I mean, keeping in mind this was week 1, when, for all we know, everybody's hunky-dory. But looking back on it now, I wish I would have included that in my story or made some sort of reference to it. Maybe Stefon Diggs was saying something nice to him, and but he didn't snap at anybody else. a stream of players were coming over, popping him on the shoulder pads, I think, or patting him on the back, or, whatever. Like I said, dapping him up. Hey, man, we'll get him next week. And whatever Stefon Diggs said to him, Josh Allen wasn't having it. And I wish I would have put that in my story at the time, but I think that we look back and Stefon Diggs clearly in that moment, and it happened so quickly, would lead maybe one to believe on the regular was getting under Josh Allen's skin. And that was when Stefon Diggs was a superstar still. This wasn't the Stefon Diggs where, and I guess this is the part in the podcast where you have to mention it. Excuse me. Let me hit this mute. Sorry about that. Frog in my throat. First 9 games of the season, 70 receptions, 834 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's the first 9 games. Last 10, including playoffs, 47 catches, 422, 1 touchdown. So in less than half the season, or I should say more than half the season, being the last 10, his numbers dipped from 70 to 47, 834 to 422, and 7 to 1. So whatever's going on there, the dynamic wasn't working. The Bills were winning, by the way, while Stefon Diggs' production plummeted. Devin McCourty had told me for that story heading into the regular season finale against the Dolphins. Devin McCourty, who won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots and now is working for NBC Sports, an analyst for that game, had been breaking down the film as a good analyst would, a good broadcaster would. But this is a guy who also spent time defending or game planning to stop Stefon Diggs personally in a Bill Belichick defense. They played each other twice a year for a while. And this is a guy who has studied Stefon Diggs. And his comment to me, which a lot of people blew off or said was stupid, was, it looks to me as though the Bills are trying to prove that they don't need him. And by definition, finishing out the season 6-1, they didn't. And when they did throw him the ball, infamously, he dropped it. So I think that all of that is, puts it in Brandon Beane's lap to make what he thinks is a calculated risk here of addition by subtraction. Yes, as Beane said at his news conference yesterday, we are not a better team right now here on April 3rd. But the season doesn't start for 5 more months, and we're going to get better. So this is the calculated risk of eating this cap hit. Apparently the Bills were that desperate to move on from this guy. And again, sweeten the pot to get a 2nd-round pick for next year, which is diluted because it doesn't produce a player for whether the Bills use it or for the next team that they maybe want to trade it to. It doesn't produce a player for 13 months in terms of arrival or being on your payroll. And it doesn't produce a player that you can put in front of your fans in a game for 18 months. So anyways, the Bills obviously wanted to move on from Stefon Diggs, and there's no shortage of reasons why, but I do understand they need to figure out how to replace him.
Well, and it doesn't create any cap room. It doesn't. There might be a way where the Bills can make a future trade for another veteran wide receiver, perhaps even another star number 1 receiver to replace Stefon Diggs, but this trade doesn't facilitate that in the short term. So on paper, for the 2024 season, this trade doesn't net a player return or an asset return that makes the Bills any better, and in some ways it makes them slightly worse. There are, as you explained, tangible reasons why addition by subtraction, perhaps the Bills' offense as a whole could emerge better off in this season without this coming version of Stefon Diggs. I think a lot of us don't believe at his age or the way he performed in the second half of last season that the Bills would get the all-pro version of Stefon Diggs back this coming season, or that they even wanted that maybe they wanted a more diversified offense anyways, or an offense that features the tight ends and different type of players in different ways. And so I think there's a calculus you can look at to where with the Curtis Samuel signing, with the potential of drafting wide receiver Another, Dalton Kincaid no longer being a rookie, that the offense could be just as good, if not maybe better, without Stefon Diggs. But I do wonder, in the totality, you can do that with each of the moves, with cutting Tre'Davious White, with cutting Jordan Poyer, with getting rid of Mitch Morse, and every different move and different player that the Bills didn't re-sign this past offseason. Gabe Davis maybe wasn't worth the money, but the totality of losing so much talent and so much entrenched leadership and skill and even star power on the
A
team
lot of captains.
from the marketing perspective. And I think the Bills are going to have somewhere around like 25% of their salary cap taken up with dead cap money this season. And they're still going to have a good roster. And you can go position by position and figure out how they're replacing all of these players. But on the whole, replacing all of them and really only spending 75% of your salary cap on players that are on this current roster does seem like it could catch up with the Bills this season and potentially lower their ceiling, lower their depth. They're not going to have the same ability to sign different free agents late in the game that they did. And, it just might. I think the Bills are going to be pretty good in the long term, especially getting out of the Stefon Diggs contract a year from now. It's going to clean up their cap sheet. But in the short term, it's going to be a lesser roster going into the next season, and they're going to be more reliant on Josh Allen and his ability to make up for losing key players and key leaders all over the roster and other spots.
The Bills won with not only Stefon Diggs' production being down, there were some weeks in which he played fewer snaps than Trent Sherfield and Khalil Shakir. Now you look back on it now and say, well, of course, Khalil Shakir was emerging. He deserved the time. But the three receivers that the Bills would put on the field in December and November, a lot of times were Trent Sherfield, Khalil Shakir, and Gabriel Davis. And Stefon Diggs would be on the sidelines. And of course, we'd ask Joe Brady that every Monday. And well, those are the packages. McDermott would say the same thing. And then Josh Norman at the end of the season told the Associated Press that, John Worrow, I should say, not just the Associated Press, he told John Worrow that Diggs was taking himself off the field. So again, do you want to deal with that from the start of the season? If he's whatever disconnect he's feeling, whether, he's just whatever it is, there are things festering that I think that the Bills are happy to be out of the Stefon Diggs business because of the toxicity of it, the things that bleed into other parts of the game. Do you want your young players learning from this behavior or adopting it? There's all kinds of things that you could bring into it. I mean, his teammates voted him captain. They liked the guy. They revered the guy. But you don't necessarily always give the guy or vote a guy for captain because he's, maybe the best person for the job. Sometimes it is a little bit of a popularity contest, just as it would be for the Pro Bowl or whatever. Not that I'm saying that his Bills teammates had it wrong. Maybe there's a segment of the roster that a large enough segment of the roster, obviously, to elect him captain, who just, they also elected Gabriel Davis a captain. Here's a guy who, would pout after tough losses. He would say the right things, but you'd have to pry it out of him. A guy who, not a. Sometimes you give a guy the C to keep him happy. Sometimes, I don't know. I mean, now I'm rambling and I'm speculating, but obviously everything here in the last couple of months recasts Stefon Diggs for a lot of people. And now all the things that perhaps everybody chooses to ignore, you're reminded. Now, so here's the thing. I think this is an interesting, dynamic. When the season ended, especially with the drop, Stefon Diggs, let's say the Bills lose that game, but Diggs makes that catch. Things are probably different. But anytime Stefon Diggs wants to send out one of his cryptic tweets or anybody wants to post audio of him, you used to hear a lot of pushback. Now it's pictures of him dropping the ball from Bills fans. Like, hey, get your shit together. Stop, making the rounds on the media and talking about how you're a pro's pro, as he told Kay Adams. We're the fans were getting tired of it. So it used to be, anytime anyone would say something even remotely critical of Stefon Diggs, you had Bills fans storming the gates. F you, get bent, whatever. Leave our guy alone. He's the best. He's misunderstood. You're constantly putting words in his mouth. You don't get it. All these types of things. And then, and I'll even say as a quick aside, I thought it was fascinating, and we talked about it with the Maddie Glab hot mic incident, in which, yes, she used a profanity, but she essentially said he's difficult to work with. And she got suspended for it. But when she apologized after that hot mic incident, fans were quick to defend her. You don't have anything to worry about. It was a mistake. No big deal. Don't beat yourself up over it. And then just when you thought Stefon Diggs was going to take the high road or not throw fuel on the fire, he puts out a series of tweets about how his feelings are hurt. And immediately everybody was, fire Maddie Glab. She's got to go. C-bag, B-word, you name it. It was disgusting. And it was all because Stefon Diggs, who had to know. I mean, he knows the power of social media. He didn't have to say it. He knew the fans were going to say it. Say all these things. And he just lit the match and walked away. That was my aside. So back to it. After the season, after he drops the ball, he's doing some rounds. He calls himself a pro's pro. He's got a tweet here. His brothers may be tweeting. He still hasn't defended the Bills or Josh Allen or anything else against his brother, or to his whatever. And I tweeted out, we're getting something along the lines of, we're getting towards addition by subtraction territory here with Stefon Diggs. And I knew when I sent that tweet, I'm like, all right, here we go. I know people are going to be coming at me. They didn't. The tenor had changed. It was maybe 50-50 or maybe even 60-40, or the 40% saying, Tim, you don't know what you're talking about. But there was just a lot of either I'm sick of it too, or, but we can't. His contract is too onerous, or obviously people on Twitter aren't using the word onerous, but they were pretty much saying, but they can't. They're stuck with him. And this was back in February. This was when he was doing the rounds, I think, at the Super Bowl or Super Bowl related content. Maybe it was even early March. No, it was before the Super Bowl. It was before the Super Bowl. Fans were already like, those fans who were armed to the teeth to protect Stefon Diggs, there weren't nearly as many of them anymore. And it was either because he was wearing them out too, or they were just like, yeah, we're stuck with him. Anyway, I just thought that was fascinating. So my column yesterday, there was nothing in that column that hadn't been reported or that people didn't know. Nothing. And I had so many people send me notes, DM me on Twitter, respond in the comments, I had somebody send me an email today. They found my personal email, which is cool, and sent me an email and said, I didn't realize it until I read it all here. Like, you put it in such succinct terms as to why this move had to happen. Thank you. There's nothing in there that was no inside information in there other than he wore the Bills out. And I just said, here are all the things. These are all the things that in real time we all knew about. I didn't mention the Josh Allen snapping at him because I didn't report it. Everything in that column I wrote yesterday was known, but people chose to rationalize it, justify it. He just wants to win, or leave him alone. He's misunderstood. He's the most misunderstood, transparent person I've ever been around. He's transparent, yes, yet he's misunderstood. Ask him anything until he's offended, or he stops making himself a bail. Ask him anything, but we can't find him. Anyways, the dynamic of the fans and how they have come to accept this has been interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I think this plays into it, but it's probably more within the Bills' walls. But I like the way you termed it in your column that death by 1,000 microaggressions. That none of these incidents were that extreme, or some of them might have been blown out of proportion or not even have been instances, but each step along the way where the Bills and Stefon Diggs are getting on each other's nerves, or Stefon Diggs and the fans and the media are getting on each other's nerves, when they happen, can be explained away. And Stefon Diggs, the Bills fans can come to his defense. But as they go over time, with in personal relationships, when you're getting on each other's nerves, it's not a big deal at first until after a while, it's the biggest deal. And the smallest things can be, cause couples to get divorced or friends to never talk to each other again. And not that this was like that, but it does have that air of a divorce, of where these things built up over time and these microaggressions and these minor resentments, to where it just wasn't tenable anymore. Now, it's very convenient for that all to happen at the same time where the Bills might have some financial motivations in Josh Allen's contract, to where they don't want to pay any wide receiver the type of money Stefon Diggs was making. And even though they're taking the big cap hit for that now, they move into a new era where the wide receivers will not be paid probably as well as Stefon Diggs was. And that's a function of having one of the highest paid quarterbacks. And Kansas City did the same thing. And I think Kansas City winning the Super Bowl after rearranging their wide receiver room is probably something the Bills looked at and said, yeah, we got to do that eventually too. I think there could have been a scenario where Stefon Diggs was still a popular player, or he still is a popular player, but where all of this on-field, off-field drama never happened, but the Bills still decided to make this move for purely football reasons. That could have happened this offseason just the same, but it didn't play out that way. And it's pretty obvious that some of the non-football factors played into this decision, and the belief by many that the Bills, at least from an emotional standpoint, might be better off without Stefon Diggs. And maybe the Bills fans are better off, even if the Bills don't have the same player replacing him. And I already hear and see fans kind of wishing for the next star receiver to come in and replace him. But, not having all this drama and wondering and worrying and reading body language and thinking about how Stefon Diggs feels and how Josh Allen feels about Stefon Diggs might be just a healthier situation all around for the fan base and the team and the media. Even though it might be a little bit boring for us to cover, it might be, more normal and more emotionally stable to deal with whoever comes in as the new number one or wide receiver for the Bills.
Yeah, stability is important. And I think that, whether you agree that culture is a real thing or that it's important, I know that there are a lot of people who believe that, especially who are analytic minded, and I'm not using that as a pejorative. I'm an analytics guy, but there are some people who go so hard on the analytics to say that culture and momentum and all these things that you can't put a number or a figure on doesn't exist. So whether it does or doesn't, the Bills certainly believe in culture, and they believe in their culture. They believe their culture works and is huge in their success. And to maintain this culture, they've hit all the right buttons so far. I don't want to say all the right buttons. We can obviously argue, Von Miller situation, how they handled the Matt Araiza situation. I don't want to get into all that, but how those things don't necessarily measure up. They do in general. I've had people tell me this. They have a no assholes policy. Sometimes you're willing to put up with it a little bit more for some than others, but they generally they have a no assholes policy. So yeah, I think that this is sharpening or trying to put their team dynamic in a little tighter focus. People who aren't, coloring outside the lines, and that's good for some teams. In fact, were we talking about a story? I hesitate also to bring up stories that I have in mind. I'll tell you remind me to tell you off the air regarding the no assholes policy. And I'll tell you a story. I was about to go down a path that would have been interesting for the podcast, but I don't want to give away a potential story idea. But anyways, I agree with you, Jonah. I think it's a recalibration of attitude, of expectations, and all that type of stuff. I think maybe they felt things were getting a little wobbly, and Stefon Diggs had to go for that reason too. Anything more you want to talk about with Stefon Diggs?
Real quick, I just wanted your take. Where do you think this trade, and not without a definitive ranking, but kind of measures up to major trades, the Jack Eichel trade, Dominic Hasek, all the way back to OJ? I mean, I think in some levels you could say it is one of the biggest trades in Buffalo sports history, but I don't know if it was.
That's a good question. I think when you're talking about draft pick assets, it's hard to say. I think you almost need to see what Brandon Beane's going to do with this 2025 second round pick. And it's hard, at least for me, to absorb or compute the significance of a trade when only one human being is involved. Like there's one person and he's leaving. You're not getting anything back. So a person back. So that's why hockey trades are so much fun, I think, is because they so often involve players, a package of players, multiple teams, basketball and baseball too. I don't want to just say hockey, but I'm saying hockey because, most of our fans are Buffalo sports fans. I mean, you can look, all right, so there's meat on the bone with taking a look at the Stefon Diggs trade from Minnesota to Buffalo because you know that it produced Justin Jefferson. And then you can go back and review that trade. And in fact, I did for a story 2 seasons ago in which I interviewed everybody involved, with the exception of Justin Jefferson, where we looked back on that trade and how it was great for both teams because it was what the Bills needed and the Vikings got what they needed, which was a receiver who wasn't Stefon Diggs. I interviewed Rick Spielman, the general manager of the Vikings at the time. I interviewed the Vikings wide receivers coach at the time, Brandon Beane, Adisa Bakari, Diggs's agent. We went through the whole, how it all happened, how it all went down. And perhaps it's educational for me to repost that as to maybe how Adisa Bakari and Stefon Diggs handled this situation, or to provide some sort of possible insight anyway as to what worked for them in the past to get them out of Minnesota and what they may have done to get out of Buffalo. Yeah, that's a great question though, Jonah. How does it rank among the trades? OJ, it was a landmark trade, but that was a convoluted deal because it begat, I think, Tom Cousineau, or the pick for Tom Cousineau, and then begat, then Tom Cousineau somehow kind of begat Jim Kelly. Really, Tom Cousineau begat Tony Hunter. A lot of people like to say that that trade they were going to draft Jim Kelly with their own draft pick. They eventually drafted Jim Kelly with the second draft pick because they knew they were going to get a quarterback they want, because they drafted 12 and 14, I believe. So they drafted the best non-quarterback on their board, knowing that they were in 2 more picks going to have their choice of Jim Kelly or Dan Marino. And so whoever in between chose to draft neither. And then now you know that the Bills valued Jim Kelly over Dan Marino on their board. But anyways, that's an aside. That I think that's a misnomer. That story gets repeated a lot, that OJ eventually brought Jim Kelly, but that's not true. OJ eventually bought Tony Hunter.
But it reminds me a little bit. Now, this is something that happened before I was even born, but I did recently read, there's a Twitter account that shares the day in Buffalo sports history and the Buffalo News front page from a lot of those events. And I read the stories that were written the day after O.J. Simpson got traded. And one of them was interesting, a Jim Kelly piece where he went into a bar and just interviewed the bartender and the bar patrons. And you saw the same sentiments that I think you got from a lot of people about Stefon Diggs yesterday. That he was a great player, had a great run during his time with the Bills, but that his time had come, and that with OJ, his contract had gotten too expensive, and there was talk about how he wanted to be in Hollywood and he didn't want to be a Buffalo Bill anymore. And most of the fans seemed ready for him to go. And I think they've gotten to that point for different reasons now with Stefon Diggs. And just to the question I asked, I don't really think, because of where he is in his career age-wise, that this is as big of a deal as, say, trading Jack Eichel or any other franchise-altering trades that the Bills have made, or whatever you'd say, the biggest trades that Buffalo sports teams have made. But it felt like that a little bit from a story perspective because of the surprise element. Even if someone like yourself could have seen this coming at some point this offseason, I don't think anybody really heard the rumblings or expected it to break yesterday the way it did. And you could just tell by how many Bills beat reporters and sports directors and people like that are on vacation because they anticipated this being a no news week for the Bills in the NFL. And it dropped yesterday at 11 o'clock and really seemed like a huge deal, and was a huge deal, but seemed like an even bigger deal because of the surprise element yesterday morning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say that I began writing my column. When did today is Thursday, trade one to Tuesday night, I started writing my column. So you'll be like, wow, how did Tim Graham get this out so fast? He was just traded 45 minutes ago. Tim Graham must be really fast. I might have information or insights that I was prepared for the possibility. And then I saw the tweet, the "you sure" tweet. One more microaggression on his way out the door. Stefon Diggs. And as soon as I saw that tweet, I had heard some things. And as soon as I saw that tweet, I'm like, giddy up. I started writing, Tuesday night. And then, of course, I waited and, I didn't finish it until after the trade. I wasn't sure. But I was reading the tea leaves. And, it was, again, if you're paying attention, and unless you just want, and hey, he didn't. Anytime Josh Allen's expert at it, they were talking about it on WGR yesterday. I think it was Bulldog, Chris Parker, talking about all these guys. They say all the right things. Do they really mean them? I love Buffalo, whether it's, the blue, talking up the virtues of blue cheese over ranch, or there's all the different threads you can pull to excite a Buffalo sports fan. Stefon Diggs did them. A bit of but was he manipulating them? I don't know. Did he really mean it? I don't know. But right now, it doesn't seem like he loved Buffalo as much as Buffalo loved him. And again, that goes back to my point about some people probably feeling a little foolish about seeing all these things, or failing to see all these other things because they were blinded by this superstar who loves us, who gets us, who wants to be here. And now all that's been yanked out of, didn't really want to be here that bad, or as badly as, or forever anyway. I mean, it's not to say that, it wasn't great at one point, but fascinating how it all evolved.
I will say Stefon Diggs had some nice words about Buffalo and the city and the fan base on a goodbye post on Instagram, and I'll take him at his word for that because it isn't something that he does a lot. Kind of put those thoughts to paper. I think the last time I saw him write that many words was about Matty Glab and that incident. So I do think that he appreciated Buffalo and the city and the culture and the fan base while he was here, but also maybe wanted his way off of the team or had reached a point where he needed a new football situation. But it does seem to me, I think that he was somewhat sincere in the things he said about the city and the fan base and the Bills fan culture.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think he was. Yeah. That's what you're supposed to say.
But sometimes those things are very connected, I think, in Bills fans' minds, but aren't the same thing. A player can, and I think we've seen it with some retired players that loved being in Buffalo, loved playing in Buffalo, coming back to Buffalo, didn't necessarily love everything about being on the Bills while they were players.
Yeah, it's the inferiority complex of being in a market that is small, like Buffalo. We have only 2 teams, not 4, like some of the big boys, and haven't had significant success. You have your blips. You have, I think the Bills have maybe a lifetime 500 record or something, and that includes a lot of greatness. So that means that there's been some real shit seasons mixed in there, and obviously the drought. And now the Sabres have the NHL's longest drought, and Buffalo sports fans get kicked in the balls on a regular basis.
But even someone like Bruce Smith, who had a long career here in Buffalo and loved playing here, but he had some contentious negotiations with Bill Polian, and at one point signed an offer sheet with the Denver Broncos and other players and their contracts. It wasn't always for everybody that loved being a part of the Bills
Jim Kelly.
culture.
Jim Kelly hated the idea of coming to Buffalo. He shat talk Buffalo. What's the past tense? He shit talked Buffalo as often as he could when he was leaving Miami and the Miami Hurricanes, that is, and going to play in the USFL. He would always take shots at Buffalo. Now he lives here. But yeah, it's there's a lot of people who've just chosen not, Vontae Davis, rest in peace. Vontae Davis just decided I don't want to do this anymore and left at halftime. Dree Archer never showed up. Nobody's ever heard from him again. The Bills picked him up off waivers or traded for him or whatever, and I was like, nah, I'm out. There's there's been a lot of players who have just refused or talked their way out of it. Tom Cousineau, the aforementioned Tom Cousineau. In fact, that was a string of transactions of guys who didn't want to be here, right? OJ didn't want to be here for Tom Cousineau, who rather play in the CFL because he didn't want to be here. And then the conversation, of course, for Jim Kelly, who didn't want to be here until he did. Joe Cribbs, a lot of guys, all those guys who left for the USFL whenever they had an opportunity to do so. Anyways, the list is long. Ryan O'Reilly, et cetera, et cetera. Dominic Hasek wanting out, forcing his way out.
Kyle Okposo.
Kyle Okposo. That's right. Leaders, guys with the C. Let's talk about the Sabres. You were out there today. How's what's the temperature in the room with Don Granato?
Well, I mean, they are coming off a big win, 6-2 the other night against Washington Capitals, which right now are, the 8th playoff team in the Eastern Conference, and the Sabres are 5 points back, so not mathematically eliminated, even though it's going to be very, very difficult for the Sabres to make up that ground and pass the 5 different teams they need to get into the playoffs.
Oh, can I say this? So Linda Cohn on ESPN, who huge hockey fan, like she knows her hockey. That's what she's known for, right? Not just a fan, but when the Sabres, I recall the Sabres Rangers playoff series, she was covering it. She was in the post-game news conferences and stuff. She loves hockey, talks about it a lot, knows her shit. After the game, the Capitals win, she says after the highlight package, don't look now, but the Sabres are just 5 points out of the playoff hunt. And I was like, what the fuck? Who? They've been closer, and 5 points, Linda, as you should know, is a lot. Don't look now. Like, what would she say? Like, here they come. Like, come on. I just got a good chuckle out of that.
And the Sabres have played more games than most of the teams they're chasing, including Washington. So it is a bit of a mirage how close the Sabres are. I think they're more, if you look at based on points percentage, they're more chasing the team they play tomorrow night, the Philadelphia Flyers, and they're 6 points back of that. And they probably won't make up all these points. I mean, making up 6 points in 6 games is probably too difficult, but it's not on paper impossible. And every game that the Sabres continue to win, especially here on this homestand, pushes that elimination date, that expiration date further out into the season and makes it seem like the Sabres are still in the hunt and playing meaningful games now in April, which not that long ago was, a major goal of this franchise, to not be out of it and so desolate. And even if they don't make the playoffs, be a team that's contending for a playoff spot. But, it's inevitable, it seems, that the Sabres are going to miss the playoffs and miss the playoffs for now a 13th straight year. So this playoff drought's old enough to have its bar mitzvah at this point. But even without all that, even with all that, the vibes seem pretty good with this team. They're winning a bit more often than they're losing lately. The top line now with JJ Peterka playing with Thompson and Tuck. JJ Peterka is the hottest goal scorer in the NHL over the past few weeks. Thompson and Tuck are both playing well. Thompson scoring more frequently at this point in the season than they did at any point in the season prior to this. The Sabres are getting good minutes from Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power playing together. That's looking like something that, could be a future defensive pair or an option for the Sabres to go to situationally and get, really good offense out of those two number 1 picks playing together. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen had some bad starts last week, but is still finishing up a really good season and one of the best goaltending seasons by a Sabre in a really long time. And even though the Sabres are going to miss the playoffs, there's still a feel good aspect to the way they're finishing up this season Jeff Skinner's 1,000th game was an interesting event the other night because, if you read some of the fan chatter on Twitter and you listen to certain podcasts or national media members, there's some criticism about Jeff Skinner and his style of play and whether the Sabres could ever win with him being in a top line role, and his defensive inadequacies are maybe a flashpoint of why the Sabres aren't a playoff team at this point, and Jeff Skinner becoming, I believe, the first player to play 1,000 games without going to the Stanley Cup playoffs in his career.
I was having a conversation with former Sabres president Larry Quinn recently, and he made the comment that if Jeff Skinner played for Lindy Ruff, Jeff Skinner wouldn't come off the bench for a month.
Sure, and that was what Ralph Kruger basically did with Jeff Skinner, and what Rob Brindamore decided when he took over in Carolina, that he had to get rid of Jeff Skinner in order for that team to reach its potential and get better. But you don't get any of that sense, I think, from the Sabres organization, from the teammates, from the coaches, and how much his not just his play, but his personality, and Jeff Skinner, the person, was celebrated for his 1,000th game the other night. Seemed a little bit disconnected from some of that chatter from outside the Sabres about how he is, the number one problem that's wrong with this team. And I realize his contract is probably too big for what the Sabres get out of him at this point, but him now playing on the third line and being maybe more of a power play specialist or in a different role, if the Sabres have productive top two lines without Jeff Skinner, I think he becomes a real asset in kind of a secondary role. And if he's okay with that, because he didn't seem quite okay with that when Ralph Kruger put him in that role. But, just from the vibes perspective, I think things are still going pretty well in that department, and that could carry over into the offseason and into next season for the Sabres.
I hate to be old man shaking fist at cloud, but I think that although it was a fun event, I mean, this seemed to be like a lot of cool stuff. But back when I was covering hockey, 1,000th games weren't handled like this. I recall interviewing James Patrick at the stick stand, in the stick at the stick rack, about his 1,000th game. It's just like we didn't do anything special. But if you're going to do it for Kyle Okposo, it would be noticeable if you didn't do it for Jeff Skinner, right? But I wonder what the opposing teams think when they're like, they're doing all this for Jeff Skinner's 1,000th game. Kind of weird. But it's a thing now,
somewhat.
And they're going to have to do it for everybody, which I guess it's cool because it seemed like an event and it gave people something to talk about the Sabres. I mean, it's like having a bobblehead night at the Bison's game. You'd say it's something different. It's not just a game against the Rail Riders.
Well, exactly. It was something to sell some tickets and excite the fans and get people to get excited about something when the Sabres probably aren't making the playoffs. And,
shouldn't Alex Ovechkin be enough, though, to sell some tickets?
Yeah, to Washington Capitals fans, maybe. I mean, maybe, but it didn't seem to be the case. It seemed like, celebrating Jeff Skinner and getting a free red hat through the crowd the other night. And I guess I'm repeating what I just said, but it did seem like it was important for the Sabres to honor Jeff Skinner for his personality and for how well liked he is throughout the organization, and to gather all of those tribute videos. They even got his dog on there. And, it just seemed to be like now maybe, in a lot of jobs you do that when somebody's on the way out for kind of a retirement party. It did have a little bit of that vibe with all of the tributes, but I think it was important for the Sabres at various levels of the organization and the team to show how much they like Jeff Skinner and value him being part of the team, when maybe there's some outside perspective that his presence is not valued.
Can Nate Oats, I'm thinking, I don't know, you may know, maybe you don't. Would Nate Oats be the first football or basketball coach to win a national championship after being the head coach at University of Buffalo?
At UB, yes. I thought you were going to ask me about any of the local colleges, and I don't know if I can name another one. But I might be wrong if I said no.
Did Beeline win a national championship?
No, I got Michigan to the title game, but they didn't win.
Okay.
The answer is probably that nobody has done that, but I don't want to say that and find out that I'm wrong about that. There's some.
We had that problem when talking about Mike McDonald a few episodes ago. And does he hold the Western New York record or how close is he? We forgot somebody.
Yeah. Also, it's going to be tough for Alabama to win the national championship. They got to beat a UConn team that looks unbeatable here in the semifinal, and then get to the next game and win that one Monday night. And you see this a lot in college basketball where a team breaks through. This is Alabama's first Final Four. It's obviously Nate Oats' first Final Four, and it's a great story. But usually you break through to the Final Four first, and then there's another period of before you break through to national champion. Roy Williams and different coaches. There's a long list of coaches that got to the Final Four a few times before they were able to win it all. So while I think it could happen, I mean, they're a good team. They've been a top 25 team all year long. I'd be quite surprised if Alabama wins these next two games and wins it all.
I had a follow-up question I was going to ask, and it is evaporated regarding, you mentioned UConn. You don't have any children that I know of, Jonah, but if you had a child, it's kind of tough how I'm going to phrase this question because I'm crossing over. You have twins, one boy, one girl.
All right, let me write this down.
They're both fabulous at basketball, and they're being recruited. But they've decided they're going to go play for UConn and LSU, respectively. Are you more excited about your daughter who's going to play for Kim Mulkey or your son who's going to play for Dan Hurley?
Dan Hurley. I like Dan Hurley. I like the Hurley family, the story with Bob Hurley Sr. that Adrian Wojnarowski wrote so well in his book.
I think the combination being is that they both enjoy being dicks.
Yeah, I think Dan Hurley is kind of a crazy sideline presence, as Bobby Hurley is as well. And, they look like nut jobs on TV, but I don't know if that's problematic for the players. I haven't heard too much. You don't always hear these things when they are true, but I haven't heard too much of players that don't like playing for Danny Hurley. I think the officials don't like officiating either of the Hurleys, but it does seem like, the screaming and shouting at the players is either well received or not quite what you would think it would be from watching their sideline personalities like that. And, I don't want to say this or I want to be careful how I say this. I don't really think Kim Mulkey is a sympathetic figure, but it's trending towards that because
it sure is, isn't it? Like in a hurry, like within the last 3 weeks. I mean, people went from I cannot wait to read this Washington Post story to, oh, come on.
Yeah. And there's some things about it, that her parents getting divorced and family strife that's been dragged into it where like I don't think she is a sympathetic figure and I don't want her to be, but I think maybe we need to ease up on criticizing her so that she doesn't become a sympathetic figure. Then there's this weird controversy about them not being out there for the anthem and they're getting attacked.
It's getting to be a little too much. I'm starting to agree with her, which is strange, but I'm like, yeah, she's right.
Yeah, and there was an unfortunate column written about the LSU team in general, and I think some of the criticism of the players and Angel
the
Reese
LA Times,
right? Where I think that I don't love everything that Kim Mulkey has done and stood for in her career, even going back to some of her time at Baylor and some of her lack of support of Brittany Griner and her personality and things she said in the media over the years. But I don't know if the whole LSU program and everything she stands for now with LSU deserve that kind of villain treatment. But it comes with women's basketball becoming so popular and such in the mainstream entertainment that there are going to be heroes and villains. And in some perspectives, LSU is the hero and Caitlin Clark and Iowa is the villain. There's a bit of a dichotomy for who was rooting for who in that matchup. And it's just part of, Gino Auriemma was the villain of women's college basketball for a long time. And I don't know if that's the case any longer, but there's always going to be some coach and some program that's put that way. And that's was always the case in men's college basketball as well. And it's kind of Dad Brown had a really good tweet. I don't know if I can get all the language right, but he was talking about all the different elements going on in the women's tournament of star players and controversies and drama and things like that. And Rebecca Lobo insulting Albany on the telecast, which it got a lot of play. And then in the men's tournament, it's just UConn walking to the title, where everything's come for a full circle and flipped around, because that was what women's college basketball was so many years, while all the fun stories were going on in the men's tournament. Now the women's tournament has gotten more fun, And there's some fun stories, I think, with the men's tournament, but to the mainstream fan, less so. There's less interest and less things to talk about with the men's Final Four relatively than there used to be, whereas there's a lot more with the women's Final Four.
Jonah, anything else going on in Buffalo sports we need to talk about? Or in the
I wanted to
world?
mention with college basketball real quick, not Buffalo sports, but kind of Buffalo people. Illinois won the women's basketball invitational tournament, which for all intents and purposes is the new women's NIT, the #2 tournament for women's basketball. That team's coached by Shauna Green, who played at Canisius, and a freshman guard on the team, Gretchen Dolan, is Western New York's third all-time leading scorer and was Western New York Player of the Year last year. It was kind of neat to see that team finish their season that way and a bit of a local connection with that.
Anything? I don't know the answer to this. So do we know anything about the Canisius men's basketball opening?
Well, we do. I tweeted out last night what I was able to learn, that 3 finalist candidates have been on campus this week. I think, we're recording this Thursday night. I think as soon as tomorrow, we could hear of a decision or see, something leak out as to who Canisius has decided on, because I think they're close to that point. The 3 candidates that were on campus this week, one of them being Steve Curran, a former Bonna assistant who this past year was the associated coach at George Mason. I feel like he's the front runner. He's been a name that's been mentioned, even going back to past years when it was just speculated about whether the Canisius job had been open. The recruiting.
Is there a tie there?
No, I think the tie is Bonna and being, a Western New York local for a number of years, and what he did recruiting wise to help Mark Schmidt and that Bonna program be as good as they were the past few years. The other 2 candidates, Jim Christian, he has head coaching experience at Kent State, TCU, Ohio, and most recently Boston College. That would be interesting if he gets that job, the games against St. Bonaventure, because he got that Boston College job over Mark Schmidt 6 years ago, however long ago that was. And the third name, Billy Donlin, he also has head coaching experience at Kansas City, Wright State, but he's been a Power 5 assistant at Michigan, Northwestern, and most recently Clemson. Those are the 3 names. I think I would pick Steve Curran out of those 3 to be the most likely to get the job, but the other 2 have, longer resumes and head coaching experience that maybe make them, I don't want to say better suited, but differently suited for the job. And Canisius is also looking for a women's basketball coach. Their coach, Sahar Nesaba, went to Eastern Michigan, and they're going to have, 2 new coaches and a lot of new players in that basketball program next season.
All right, Jonah. Well, thanks for the rundown. And we'll come back at it again next week. Maybe we'll have another major trade to talk about. Probably not. What do we talk? We'll talk about whatever's happening in the world of sports.
Alabama winning the national championship.
There you go.
Things that happened at the Final Four, and Buffalo Bandits making their playoff push. I think that's something I'll have my eye on going into next week.
Friend of the show, Nate Oats, by the way. Do you think we could get him on the podcast as easily now as we used to?
I think if they win the national championship and we're a little bit patient, I think we could get him to join us. And I think if they lose this weekend, it might be hard to get a hold of Nate Oats for a few weeks.
Right. And he's been with us since he's been the Alabama coach. It's not even the UB version of Nate Oats. The Alabama Nate Oats has been on Tim Graham and Friends.
That's right. Well, and then another Buffalo connection there is that, the director of operations, or he has a different title, director of analytics might be what he does now, but Adam Bauman, who's the head coach of the Blue Collar U Buffalo basketball team.
Oh, right.
In the TBT is still on Nate Oats' staff. And if they were to win or just get into the Final Four, kind of an accomplishment for him and the Buffalo tie there. They have less Buffalo ties on this team than they had a year ago. Last year they had Brian Hodgson also being an assistant, and Dom Welch on the team, and James Rojas, a player from Jamestown. So they were more Western New York connected a year ago when they were a #1 seed and considered a Final Four favorite. And now this team, it's Nate Oats and a few support staffers that were with him in Buffalo on the team now.
All right, Jonah, have a good weekend. And we'll reconvene, or we'll touch base, and we'll figure out what the hell we're going to talk about on the next episode. Sabres, I suppose.
Right. It's a big WrestleMania weekend. We didn't get much into that.
Right.
We can recap when we get back.
Maybe we can get old friend Lex Luger on. It's been a while.
All right.
He's probably at Russell, right? They go, there's a big convention and appearances
he
and all
could
kinds of stuff.
very well be in Philadelphia signing autographs while we're recording this right now.
Yeah. Dig it. I'll reach out to him. All right, Jonah. Thanks. And thanks to everybody out there for checking out Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.